The wind carried the dust of the frontier across the lonely station platform when the train finally hissed to a stop. Lanterns swung in the early evening breeze, casting long golden lines on the ground as the passengers stepped out one by one. Among them stood a young woman clutching a worn suitcase, her heart pounding harder than the wheels that had carried her across half the country. She had come as a mail-order bride, answering the letter of a single father who lived far from the cities she once knew. She had imagined a quiet ranch cabin, a stern widower, and children who might take weeks to warm to her. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment she stepped down and heard a small voice calling a word she had never expected. The boy who ran toward her seemed no older than 8. His boots kicked up pale dirt, and his eyes shone with something that caught her off guard. Hope. Right behind him came another child, a girl with a braid so long it nearly brushed her waist. They stopped a few feet from the new bride, staring at her with an expression that made her grip the handle of her suitcase even tighter. She wanted to greet them kindly, but her throat tightened before she could speak. It was the girl who broke the silence first. Lifting her chin as if she had rehearsed the moment 100 times, "Are you the one Paz wrote to?" she asked. Her voice soft yet steady in the old American hush of the frontier evening. Before she could answer, the boy added something that sent a strange warmth and fear through her chest at the same time. "We already been calling you by a name. We decided it together." Her breath caught. She had not even seen their father yet. She had not stepped foot inside the ranch. She had not learned anything about the children except what their father wrote in his careful, honest letters. The letters of a man who spoke little of himself, but always spoke of his children as if they were lanterns guiding him through the darkest winters. She wanted to ask what name they had chosen. She wanted to laugh gently and put them at ease. But the strange weight in their words made her pause. A tall figure stepped out from behind. The wagon hitched near the station. His shoulders were broad, marked by years of ranch work, and his stride was steady like someone who had survived more storms than he shared. His hair was dark, tied loosely at the back, and the fading sunset warmed the strong lines of his face. He reached the children before he reached her and placed his hand on each small shoulder, as if confirming they were still safe under his. "Watch. This must be quite the shock for her," he told them in a low voice that carried through the dusty air. His gaze finally met hers, and she felt something shift inside her. His eyes held both caution and quiet strength, the kind of strength born from loss and long nights beside a fire when no one else was awake. He stepped closer, holding the brim of his hat respectfully. "My name is Hodgson," he said. "Thank you for coming all this way." She nodded, unable to trust her voice just yet. He noticed, but he did not rush her. Instead, he lifted her suitcase for her, his movements gentle, despite the roughness of his hands. The children stayed close to him, their faces half hidden behind his coat, as though studying her carefully, trying to learn everything about her with one long look. On the wagon ride back to the ranch, the children whispered to one another while Hodgson guided the horses across the open plains. The landscape stretched out like a quiet promise. Fading gold grass swayed under the wind, and the sky turned a deep amber as evening settled in. She wrapped her shawl tighter, not because of the cold, but because of the strange feeling rising in her chest. A mail-order bride was supposed to feel nervous meeting her new husband. She was supposed to worry about the expectations waiting for her. But what unsettled her now were the children's words. Why had they already chosen a name for her? Why had they looked at her with that mix of longing and certainty? The ranch cabin appeared at the edge of the valley, warm light glowing from the windows like an invitation. When they stepped inside, the fire crackled with a comfort she had not felt in years. Hodgson set her suitcase down near the rocking chair. The children gathered around her again, their eyes shining in the freelish. The boy finally whispered the name they had chosen. She nearly lost her breath when she heard it. It was a name filled with meaning, as if they had been waiting for someone to carry that place in their hearts. She felt her knees weaken, but she steadied herself before anyone noticed. She smiled softly at them, trying to hide the sudden shaking in her hands. "Why would you call me that already?" she asked, her voice barely above the crackle of the fire. The children exchanged glances, then looked at their father. Hodgson's jaw tightened just slightly. as though the question pressed on something painful inside him. He moved a little closer, resting one hand on the mantel, his eyes never leaving hers. "They've been without someone to call that for a long time," he said quietly. "Longer than they understand." Her heart tightened at his words. She wondered about the children's mother, about the silence that hung in the cabin like an unfinished story. The old American frontier held many tales of loss, but standing there, she felt she was stepping into one that still had open wounds, as they shared a simple supper. The children stayed close to her chair, as if afraid she might vanish if they looked away. Hodgson watched them quietly, something unreadable in his expression. She saw it in the way his fingers brushed the edge of his cup, in the way his shoulders stiffened whenever the children leaned against her. He had invited her here as a mail-order bride, but she sensed there was something he feared about this new beginning, something unspoken. Later, when the children were sent to their room, she helped carry the small lantern upstairs. The wooden steps creaked under her feet, but she found herself comforted by the old cabin sounds. She tucked the blanket around the youngest child, who grabbed her wrist gently before letting go, as if making sure she would still be there in the morning. When she came back downstairs, Hodgson was tending the fire. He did not look at her at first. The flames reflected in his eyes, casting shadows that hinted at battles he did not speak of. Finally, he glanced up. "I need to tell you something before you settle in," he said, his voice deep and steady. But carrying a weight that made her pulse quicken, she stood still, hands clasped together. Waiting for whatever truth he had kept hidden in the quiet between them, he took a slow breath, then said, "There's a reason the children were already calling you that, and you deserve to know it before you take another step into this home." Her heart pounded as the fire popped sharply behind him. He opened his mouth to continue, but before he could speak, a sudden knock echoed against the cabin door. Loud and unexpected in the calm night, Hodgson froze. She felt her breath slip from her chest, and the door rattled again. Hodgson did not move at first. His hand hovered near the mantel as if he needed its strength to keep himself steady. The knock came again, sharper this time, cutting through the warm cabin air like a cold blade. She felt her stomach tighten as she stepped back from the door instinctively, unsure what kind of trouble followed a man this far into the plains. Out here, a simple knock after nightfall carried more questions than answers. The children's soft voices whispered upstairs, proving they were still awake. Listening for any shift in the atmosphere, Hodgson finally stepped forward, his boots firm against the wooden floor. He paused just before reaching the handle and glanced over his shoulder at her. Something colder than fear flickered in his eyes, something that hinted this moment had been coming for longer than she understood. He lifted one hand, silently signaling her to stand far from the door. She obeyed without argument, pressing herself near the rocking chair where her suitcase rested. When Hodgson opened the door, the lantern light spilled out onto a man standing in the cold. His clothes were travel-worn, dust coating the edges of his coat, and his hat was pulled low enough to hide most of his face. But she could still make out the tired tension in the way he held himself, as if he had ridden hard to reach the ranch before the night deepened. His voice came out strained, almost hoarse. "I need to speak with you," the man said. "It's important." Hodgson, blocking the doorway, told her everything. This was not a friend. This was not someone welcomed with an easy nod or a warm drink by the fire. The silence between the two men tightened the air until she could barely breathe. She watched Hodgson's jaw shift, the muscle tightening beneath the fire's glow. "Not tonight," Hodgson answered. "My children are asleep." The stranger's gaze drifted past him, catching sight of her. His eyes narrowed slightly, confusion or recognition flashing across his face. She stepped back, instinctively, unsure why he looked at her like he carried a truth she had not been told yet. The man returned his attention to Hodgson. "Then you need to come outside," the stranger insisted. "Now, there's no time for waiting." For a long moment, Hodgson did not move. Then, with heavy reluctance, he stepped outside and pulled the door behind him. Leaving her alone inside the cabin, with nothing but firelight and a tightening worry, she heard the murmur of voices, too low to understand, but the tone carried urgency. It felt as though the world outside had shifted in a way she did not yet understand. Minutes stretched, marked only by the soft crackle of burning logs. She paced once, twice, then stopped at the window, resisting the urge to peek out into the dark. Instead, she held her hands together, trying to calm the nervous shaking in her fingers. She wondered what news had followed Hawkson across the plains, and why it arrived on the same night she came as a mail-order bride. When the door finally opened again, she straightened immediately. Hawkson entered slowly, not with the steady confidence from earlier, but with a heaviness he tried to hide. He shut the door behind him and stood there for a moment. As though choosing what to say, "That man will return tomorrow," he said quietly. "There's something I have to deal with. Something from before you came here." She wanted to ask questions, but something in his tone warned her that tonight was not the time. Still, the unease inside her grew. She had left her old life behind to start fresh, believing this marriage might offer something stable, something safe. Yet she could not shake the feeling that Hawkson had been carrying a burden long before. He sent the first letter asking for a bride. He walked past her and added another log to the fire. Watching the sparks rise before settling, the glow lit the lines of his face, revealing the years etched there, not in number, but in hardship. She sensed a story held deep inside him, one he had not trusted her with yet. She wondered if the name the children had given her had something to do with the burden now knocking at their door. He finally spoke again, softer than before. "You being here is not a mistake. I just need you to know that." She nodded slowly, unsure of how much comfort the words were meant to give. She followed him with her eyes as he climbed the stairs to check on the children. When he returned, she was still standing near the fire, trying to piece together the evening. Hawkson walked past her and picked up her suitcase. "I'll show you to the spare room," he said, his voice steady but distant. As she followed him upstairs, she noticed the older wooden rail worn smooth by years of small hands gripping it. The house was quiet except for the nighttime murmurs of the old cabin settling. Hawkson opened the door to a modest room with a small window overlooking the dark fields. The simple quilt on the bed felt warm and welcoming, a small kindness in the middle of the uncertainty growing around her. "If anything frightens you tonight," Hawkson said from the doorway, "you come find me or the children. This house stands stronger when we stay close." His words sounded less like comfort and more like preparation. She swallowed gently and nodded. When he closed the door, she sat on the bed, letting the quiet wrap around her. She tried to steady her thoughts, but they kept circling back to the knock at the door. The stranger's voice and Hawkson's eyes filled with unspoken history. Sleep did not come easily. Every creak of the cabin made her wonder if the stranger lingered outside, waiting for dawn. The plains carried many dangers, but the most unsettling thing was not the threat she could imagine. It was the one she could not see yet, the one tied to the heavy tension in Hawkson's voice. Morning came with pale light slipping across the quilt. When she opened her door, the children were already awake, sitting near the top of the stairs with quiet smiles that softened her worries for a moment. The girl ran to her and took her hand as if it were already familiar. The boy followed, staying close to her side. Their warmth made her chest ache. Children adapted quickly on the frontier, she knew. But these children looked at her not with caution, but with a certainty she did not yet understand. They led her downstairs, where the fire had already been rekindled, the warm smell of wood filling the cabin. Hawkson stood near the table, rolling up his sleeves as though preparing for a long day. When he looked up, his expression softened slightly at the sight of his children clinging to her. But the worry from last night still lingered behind his eyes. "We'll talk after breakfast," he said. "There's something I need to explain before that man comes back." Her heart tightened again. She took a seat at the table, trying to steady her breath as Hawkson placed a tin cup before her. The children sat on either side of her, as if anchoring her in place. Across the table, Hawkson leaned forward, resting his hands together. The fire crackled between them, casting shadows across his face. "There's a truth you need to hear," he said, his voice low and controlled. "And it starts with why the children already had a name for you before. You ever stepped off that train?" Felt the world narrow around his words. He took a slow breath. "There. Mother did not leave the way most folks think, he said. And what happened to her is the reason. That man came knocking last night. Her pulse quickened, and the reason he's coming back today. Felt her breath tighten as Hoxson's words settled in the quiet air between them. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing a weight he had carried far too long. The children watched him with a mixture of trust and fear, as though they already sensed this story was one that shaped their entire world. Hoxson rested his hands on the table, steady but tense, as though bracing himself for a storm he knew was coming. Their mother was caught in something dangerous, he said, something she tried to shield them from. And I think the man from last night believes it's still tied to this ranch. Her heart pounded. She had come here expecting simple frontier life, not layered mystery. She studied Hoxson carefully, noticing how his fingers curled slightly against the wood, how his shoulders carried stories he had never put into words. She waited for him to continue, but before he could, the youngest child tugged at her sleeve. Looking up at her with tear-bright eyes, "Pa says she was brave," the little one whispered. "But bad folks didn't like brave." Hoxson drew a slow breath, his gaze softening toward the child before returning to the woman who had traveled so far to join their family. "That's close enough for now," he said, but she needed more. She felt it pull at her, the way frontier truth often did when people tried to hide it. On this land, secrets rarely stayed buried. The wind carried rumors across long miles, and a ranch cabin could hold echoes long after voices had faded. "What does the man want from you?" she asked quietly, meeting Hoxson's eyes. He hesitated. It was not the uncertainty of someone who did not know the answer. It was the hesitation of someone deciding whether to share a truth that would change how she saw him. His jaw tightened just slightly. "He thinks I know where she hid something," Hoxson said. "Something she never told me about. Something that might put all of us in danger now that he's come looking for it." Before she could respond, a loud thud echoed from outside the cabin. All of them froze. Hoxson stood instantly, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor. The children rushed to her, clinging to her arms as though she had already become a shield in their young eyes. Hoxson moved to the window, lifting the curtain just enough to peer outside. "It's only the horses," he said after a moment, though worry still shadowed his tone. Wind must be stirring them. But she recognized the strain behind his reassurance. She sensed he was preparing for something larger, something that had been creeping toward this ranch long before she arrived. As he stepped away from the window, he murmured for the children to finish their bread. She noticed how he kept scanning the cabin in small, subtle ways, as though counting the exits, measuring the distance between danger and safety. Throughout the morning chores, she stayed close to the children while Hoxson worked near the barn. The plains spread wide and calm, but a heaviness hung beneath the peaceful surface. The girl clung to her hand, leading her through the garden patch, showing her where the wild herbs grew and telling small stories about the land. Yet every few minutes, the child glanced toward her father, checking if he was still within sight at one point. As they gathered water, the girl looked up and whispered, "The name we gave you was the one she wanted us to use someday. Pa says folks sometimes find their way to each other even when they don't know it yet." The woman felt her heart shift. She wondered how many nights these children had dreamed of someone filling a space their mother left behind. She also wondered whether Hoxson had chosen her for reasons deeper than the simple need for help on a ranch. The old American plains rarely brought strangers together by accident. There was always something in the wind guiding paths. Later, while Hoxson repaired a broken fence rail, the stranger from the night before returned. She saw him from the porch, riding a dark horse that moved with sharp impatience. Hoxson dropped his tools and walked toward him, meeting him halfway before he could reach the cabin. The woman kept the children inside, hiding behind the curtain, watching the two men speak. This time, their voices rose. "You can't pretend she didn't tell you," the stranger snapped. "She never trusted anyone but you." "And I told you before, I don't have whatever you think she hid," Hoxson replied, his tone firm and unshaken. "My children were barely past cradle age when she left." The stranger leaned forward in the saddle. "Then why was my brother hunting her before she vanished?" Cold fear rushed through her. The children stiffened beside her, both turning silently toward their father. She could not hear the rest clearly, but she saw the stranger's posture harden. Hodgson stepped closer, jaw tight, his hands balled at his sides. After a long exchange, the man wheeled his horse around and rode off, kicking up dust as he disappeared down the road. When Hodgson returned to the cabin, he found her still standing behind the curtain. He paused in the doorway, meeting her eyes with a tired honesty she had not seen from him before. "He's not going to let this go," Hodgson murmured. "His brother believed my wife kept something from him. Something they both wanted. But I don't know whether it was land papers, money, or something else entirely." "Why would they think she trusted you with it?" she asked. "Because I was the only one who stood by her when her own kin turned against her," Hodgson replied. "But that doesn't mean she told me everything." She noticed the way he clenched his jaw, as though fighting memories he did not want to share. The children stood behind her, silent but watchful, pressing close to her skirts. The cabin felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves had tightened around the stories trapped inside as the day went on. The children's behavior shifted. They stayed near her, shadowing her movements as she cooked, cleaned, and tried to make sense of her new life. The girl whispered questions about the stranger. The boy asked whether bad men always returned when they wanted something. She did her best to soothe him, but she felt the same unease settling in her own chest. Later, while Hodgson saddled a horse to fetch supplies from town, she gathered the children on the porch. The wind carried the smell of pine and dust, a reminder that beauty and danger live side by side on the frontier. The boy leaned against her arm. "Pa gets quiet when he thinks about her," he whispered. "He tries to be strong, but he misses her the way the sky misses the sun when storms come." The woman felt her heart soften. She looked toward Hodgson, who was adjusting the reins with a distant look in his eyes. There was pain there, but also something steady, something that held their small family together through every storm. She wondered what secrets his late wife kept from him, and whether those secrets could tear apart the fragile hope growing inside the cabin. Hodgson rode off toward town, leaving the three of them standing together. She held the children close, watching the dust settle behind him. She sensed that every step he took now brought them closer to danger, not farther from it. That night, long after sunset, painted the sky in deep amber. She heard something outside the cabin. Not the wind, not the horses. Something heavier, something purposeful. The children woke and slipped out of their room, clinging to her sides. She moved them behind her, inching toward the window with slow breaths. When she lifted the curtain, her chest tightened. A shadowed figure stood near the barn. Half hidden in the darkness? It wasn't Hodgson, and whoever it was. They were not moving toward the door. They were searching for something. Something that might still be hidden on this land. Something that could destroy everything this family had left. She felt her heart pound as the shadow near the barn moved again, slow and deliberate, as if the figure knew exactly what they were looking for. The children pressed themselves to her sides, trembling in the dim firelight. She drew a steady breath, trying to anchor herself. This was the frontier, and nights like these tested the strength of any soul who chose to live on untamed land. She scanned the yard through the thin curtain and saw the stranger bend. Brushing his hand along the ground as though searching for tracks or hidden markers, the barn lantern swung gently from a beam. Catching the edge of his face for a brief moment, she recognized him. The same man who had spoken to Hodgson the night before, but this time he carried no patience, no concern for who might be watching. There was purpose in his stance, something sharp in the way he lifted the barn latch and slipped inside. She clutched the children closer, stepped away from the window. The plains were quiet outside, but the silence felt heavy, as if the land itself held its breath. She knelt beside the children. "You stay here," she whispered, "close to the fire. Do not move until I say." The girl shook her head, eyes wide. "You can't go alone," she said, tears forming. "I'm not going out there," she assured her. "But I need to check if the door is locked. If he comes toward the cabin, we must be ready." The boy swallowed hard, nodding with a seriousness that broke her heart a little. She stood, forcing her hands not to shake as she moved toward the front door. She tested the iron latch and found it secure. Still, she pushed a wooden stool beneath the handle for extra strength. Then she hurried back to the children, guiding them toward the inner corner of the cabin where the fire cast warm protection. Minutes passed in tense silence. She strained to hear footsteps or voices, but the only sound was the distant scrape of wood from the barn. It was not until she heard the sudden neigh of startled horses that fear shot through her. The figure had found something. She didn't know what Hoxton's late wife might have hidden. But whatever it was had drawn danger straight to their doorstep. She waited with the children holding their hands as the barn door creaked open again. This time, she saw movement heading not toward the road, but toward the well behind the cabin. The stranger crouched beside it, searching the stones, running his hand along the old rope. The girl whispered, "Why is he there?" Her voice shook, but the question held truth. The well had been covered for years. Hoxton had said it dried during a long drought, and the family no longer used it. She watched as the stranger pried loose one of the stones near the foundation. The stone fell away with a soft thud, and the man leaned in, examining whatever was hidden beneath. A soft gasp escaped her. The children looked to her for answers she did not have. She felt a growing need to protect them in a way she had never felt before. A need that rooted itself deep inside her like an instinct awakened by the frontier night. Then she heard the distant sound of hooves. "Hawks on," she almost cried out in relief. The children heard it too and ran to the window, lifting the curtain enough to see him riding hard up the path. Dust rising behind him like a warning trail. His silhouette cut through the night with fierce urgency. But before he reached the cabin, he saw the man near the well. Hoxton reined the horse sharply, leaping down before the animal even stopped. The stranger straightened, turning to face him. Even from inside, she could sense the tension between the two men. Hoxton's voice carried across the yard. "Leave this land now?" The stranger took a step forward, shoulders tight, jaw set. His reply was low, but steady. "Not without what she left behind." The barn lantern flickered in the wind, throwing shadows across the ground. The woman pulled the children back from the window, fear climbing through her chest as the men stood facing each other. She wished the night could swallow them both before anything else happened. But the frontier rarely granted easy answers. The argument outside grew sharper. "You think I kept secrets from my own wife?" Hoxton said, voice rising. "You think she trusted me with something she feared your family for? She trusted no one else," the stranger shot back. "And if you don't give it to me, I will tear apart every rail of this ranch to find it." Hoxton stepped closer, the kind of step that made intentions clear. Not violence. Not anger. A warning. A promise to protect. Even from inside, she could sense the weight of the moment. This was not just a dispute over lost items. This was the kind of conflict that changed lives on the frontier. Hoxton spoke again, quieter, but sharper. "You don't know what you're stirring. Leave before you wake more ghosts." The stranger did not flinch. "The only ghosts here belong to the truth you're hiding." The tension thickened as both men stood in the cold air, neither willing to back down. The horses stirred uneasily at the edges of the yard, as though sensing the storm brewing between their owners. The woman pressed her fingers to her lips, praying silently that the children wouldn't hear what came next. But frontier life did not shelter young ears. They stood beside her, listening to every word, their faces pale with worry. Suddenly something shifted in the stranger's expression. He reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a small leather pouch. He held it up toward Hoxton. "This belonged to her," he said. "You recognize it, don't you?" Hoxton froze. Even from the cabin, she could see the way his breath caught, the way something inside him twisted. He took a step closer, reaching out slowly. "That was hers," he said. "Where did you get it?" The stranger closed his hand around it. "Found near the river, the place she was last seen." A deep ache crossed Hoxton's face, raw and unhidden. The children saw it too and clung tighter to the woman. She wrapped her arms around them, feeling their small hearts racing against her palms. "What are you trying to prove?" Hoxton whispered. "That she trusted someone besides you," the stranger said. And that person hid something for her. Hoxton shook his head. No. If she hid something, it wasn't out of distrust. It was fear. The stranger hesitated for the first time. She watched, breath tight as Hoxton continued, voice steady but heavy. Her fear wasn't you. It was your brother. The stranger stiffened. The air shifted, as if the wind itself paused to listen. My brother is dead, the man said quietly, and I need to know whether she died because of what he chased. Hoxton looked toward the well, toward the barn, toward the land that had held too many secrets. If she hid something here, it wasn't for you. It was for her children. At that, the stranger's gaze turned toward the cabin. He saw the soft glow through the window. He saw small shadows behind it. She felt her heart stop. He stepped forward once more. Then I need to know what kind of danger they're still in. Hoxton did not answer. The stranger's voice sharpened. Because someone else rode into this valley today. Her breath caught. She looked at Hoxton, waiting for his reaction. He stiffened. Who? The stranger pointed toward the ridge beyond the pines. A rider in dark clothing. He wasn't following me. He was following your children's trail. Fear shot through her like lightning. The stranger continued. Your wife didn't just hide something. She hid someone's secret that was never meant to be found. Hoxton's face hardened, and that someone is coming here. The wind picked up across the plains, carrying dust and cold with it, as though the land braced for the storm moving toward the ranch. The children clung to her. The lantern side flickered, and in the far distance, a second set of hooves echoed faintly through the valley. The faint sound of distant hooves grew clearer with each passing second. Steady like a warning, carried across the open valley. The woman held the children close as their small bodies trembled against her arms. Hoxton stepped forward into the yard, the stranger beside him, both standing shoulder to shoulder as the firelight from the cabin flickered across their faces. For the first time since the man had arrived, they appeared not as rivals, but as two men united by danger greater than their differences. A lone rider appeared at the ridge, dark coat whipping behind him as he crossed the narrow slope. His horse moved with intent, the kind of aim that had nothing to do with wandering roads or harmless visits. Hoxton's jaw tightened. The stranger's hand hovered near his belt, not for a weapon, but out of instinct from years of guarding his own survival. The woman moved the children toward the back room, where a small window overlooked the wide plains. She whispered for them to stay low, to stay quiet, to trust their father. The girl clung to her hand until the last moment before letting go, whispering a soft plea for everything to be all right. The woman brushed her hair gently, promising that no harm would reach them inside this home. She believed it too, not because danger magically vanished on the frontier, but because families on this land had always learned how to survive storms together. When she returned to the front door, Hoxton was already walking toward the approaching rider. The stranger stood at his side, tension carved into his stance. The rider slowed as he reached the front of the ranch, his horse stamping the earth restlessly. He lifted his head, revealing sharp eyes beneath the rim of his hat. "I've come for what she promised," he said, voice cold and steady, "and I will not leave empty-handed." Hoxton did not move. "You're on my land. State your purpose cleanly," the rider smirked. "The same purpose your wife carried before she vanished. She held something of great value, something she took from my kin when she ran, and I want it now." The stranger beside Hoxton stiffened. "You're the one who chased her," he said. "You're the reason she never returned." The rider turned toward him with a dark smile. "She should not have crossed my family." The woman, watching from the doorway, felt anger rise inside her. This man had pursued a woman who only wished to protect her children. She saw how Hoxton's shoulders grew more rigid, how his breath hardened, how the truth had finally come to light. The rider was the storm they had felt building all along. "You're done bringing fear into this valley," Hoxton said, "especially near my children." The rider looked unimpressed. "Your children are the reason I'm here. The secret she hid before she died was meant for them. Something valuable enough to hunt across states." At that, the woman stepped forward. She did not know what secret lay buried on the ranch. But she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever she hid, it was not meant for your hands, she said. The rider studied her, his gaze sharp. And who are you to speak for her? I'm the woman she wished to stand in her place, she answered. The one your greed forced these children to live without? The rider's expression shifted for the first time, a faint surprise flickering across his face. He turned sharply toward Hoxton. You brought a bride into this mess, foolish. Necessary, Hoxton replied. My children deserve peace. The stranger stepped forward next. Your brother chased her across the plains for something he thought she had stolen. But she never chased wealth. She chased safety for her family. Whatever she hid was not yours to claim. The rider scowled. Then show me where it is.
Ow,
Hoxton said. This ends here. Long silence stretched between all three men. The plains around them seemed too quiet, even the wind pausing as though waiting for the truth to surface. The woman watched the rider's narrowed eyes shift across the yard, scanning the well, the barn, the cabin door. Then something in his gaze flicked with recognition. The well, he said. That's where she hid it. Hoxton stepped forward sharply, blocking the path. You go near that well, and you answer to me. The rider's horse pawed the ground as though sensing the tension between the men. The stranger looked toward the woman, then toward Hoxton. He took a step closer and lowered his voice. I think there's a way to end this without blood, he said. She may have left something behind, but it might not be what he thinks. Hoxton nodded slowly, understanding. He turned to the woman. Bring the children, he said. Let them stand beside us for this. The woman hesitated, then hurried inside. The children followed her, frightened but trusting. When they stepped out, they saw the rider, Hoxton, and the stranger standing near the well. Hoxton knelt beside the old stone rim and carefully removed the loose stone the stranger had touched the night before. Reaching inside, Hoxton pulled out a small wooden box wrapped in cloth. Weathered but intact, the rider leaned forward eagerly. That's it. The boy grabbed the woman's hand tightly. The girl pressed herself into her side. Hoxton lifted the box and held it close to his chest. This belonged to their mother, he said, and she hid it for them. Not for you. Not for wealth. For truth. The rider took a step forward. Hoxton opened the cloth slowly. Inside was a stack of worn papers, hand-drawn maps and letters, but no gold. No deeds to land. No fortune, the stranger frowned. These are just family records. The woman stepped forward, lifting one of the letters gently. It held a confession from Hoxton's wife, explaining that she had discovered the rider's family planned to steal land across the valley through false claims. She collected proof and hid it, hoping someday her children would be safe enough to use it. This is what you chased her for, Hoxton said. Proof of your family's crimes. Ain't. The rider's expression twisted with anger as the truth finally surfaced. The stranger looked at the documents and shook his head. This is enough to see you jailed, he said. You'll never trouble this ranch again. The rider spurred his horse, trying to flee, but the stranger reached him first, pulling him off the saddle. The two struggled in the dirt until Hoxton stepped in, disarming the man with controlled force. The woman shielded the children's eyes, but she saw the strength in Hoxton's stance. The courage of a man who had endured pain quietly for years, but would endure no more. By morning, the rider was taken to the sheriff, with the stranger delivering the evidence that proved everything. Peace settled back over the valley like sunlight after long storms. When Hoxton returned to the ranch, the children ran to him, clinging to him with relief so deep it trembled through their small bodies. The woman stood at the door, watching him with gratitude and quiet admiration. He walked to her, removing his hat and setting it gently on the step. You came here as a mail-order bride, he said softly. But you've become more than that to us. You brought courage when fear tried to tear this home apart. She stepped closer, her heart warm. I only did what any family would do for each other. It's because you chose to become family, Hoxton said. The children wrapped their arms around both of them, forming a circle of warmth in the cool frontier morning. Hoxton lifted the small wooden box and held it toward her and the children. This stays with us, he said. A reminder of truth, love, and the strength that saved this family." The woman nodded, her voice gentle, and a reminder that new beginnings can rise from old struggles. The ranch breathed with calm again. The horses grazed in the open fields. The cabin glowed with hope, and the valley held no more shadows. Lurking at its edge, she had arrived, as a bride to a lonely man, but she stayed as the heart of a family that had finally found its way back to peace, and on that vast old American land, love grew strong enough to protect them all.